The fluorescent lights in the hospital room buzzed faintly, casting a cold, sterile glow on everything it touched. Claire Whitmore lay curled on the narrow bed, her face pale, lips cracked, and hand trembling as she reached for her phone. She was 6 months pregnant, alone, and bleeding. The father of her child had walked out 3 weeks ago. No explanation, no remorse. Just a signature on divorce papers and a suitcase wheeled out of the apartment they once called home. Adam had left her for Serena, Claire's best friend since college, and now, apparently, a rising model newly signed with Dior. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. Claire didn't even have the energy to hate them. She just needed help. Desperately. The pain in her abdomen sharpened, and she let out a soft cry. The nurse had said someone would be back soon, but minutes felt like hours. Her fingers fumbled through her recent calls, eyes blurring with tears. She pressed call on what she thought was the hospital's emergency extension. But she was wrong. On the 38th floor of the Plaza Hotel, Julian Hart, billionaire tech CEO and widower, was reading on his balcony, unable to sleep, haunted by a past he didn't talk about. His phone vibrated once, unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something in his gut pulled him to answer. Hello? Static. Then a faint voice, weak and panicked. Please, help. Something's wrong, my baby, doctor. Julian straightened, taut, his heart slamming in his chest. Ma'am, who is this? Are you okay? No response, just sobbing. He heard hospital sounds, beeping, a distant intercom. Then, silence. Julian didn't hang up. He grabbed his coat. 45 minutes later, he stood in the doorway of room 214 at Brooklyn Medical. And when Claire opened her eyes, just barely conscious, her lips parted with one broken word, stay. That one word would change everything. And the man who once lost the love of his life would now be asked, quietly, painfully, to stay for someone he hadn't seen in 15 years. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a love story. Not yet. But it was the moment everything turned. The betrayal. The heartbreak. The call at 2 a.m. It all started here. Stay. Claire Whitmore was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, wrote thank you notes by hand, and believed in the little things, like lighting candles during dinner, even if it was just takeout. She taught second grade at a public elementary school in Brooklyn, where kids adored her for the way she made math feel like magic, and her voice could calm even the most restless child. But Claire was tired now. Not just from pregnancy. Not just from being abandoned. She was tired from holding everything together when it had already fallen apart. 3 months earlier, Claire had still believed her life was solid. Not glamorous, but stable. She and Adam had been married 5 years. They lived in a modest brownstone rental on Dean Street, shopped at Trader Joe's on Sundays, and split the chores like a team. She'd never questioned his business trips. She trusted him when he said he needed more time to figure things out. What she hadn't known was that Adam had been figuring things out with Serena. Serena Reynolds, Claire's college roommate, bridesmaid at her wedding, and once, the only person who knew Claire's biggest dream, to have a family of her own. When Claire found out she was pregnant, she cried, not out of fear, but relief. She had polycystic ovaries. Doctors had told her it might never happen. This baby was a miracle, a second chance. She told Adam on a rainy Thursday night, expecting him to lift her into his arms. Instead, he froze, silent, then said he had a meeting and left. 2 days later, he handed her divorce papers. No explanation, no apology, just I'm sorry it's come to this. And just like that, the life she built became ash. Claire had always been soft, gentle, forgiving. But now, as she walked through her 6th month of pregnancy with no partner, no best friend, and no safety net, something inside her hardened. She moved into a tiny sublet apartment. She sold her engagement ring to cover bills. She stopped answering her mother's calls because she couldn't bear the pity. Still, she showed up to work every day. Still, she graded papers. Still, she smiled at her students when all she wanted was to curl up and disappear. At night, she'd press her hand to her belly and whisper, I've got you. Even if it's just me now. But it wasn't just her anymore. Because one wrong call in the middle of a dark, cold night had brought Julian Hart back into her life. She hadn't seen him in 15 years. Back in college, he was the quiet genius in the back row of every lecture. Brilliant, reclusive, handsome in a distracted kind of way. Claire once lent him her notes during finals. He once told her she had a smile that looked like it belonged to someone who'd been through something, but smiled anyway. That was it. They never dated, never even exchanged more than a handful of words. And yet, he came. When no one else did. And now, Claire didn't know what scared her more, the silence of being alone or the sound of a familiar voice saying, "I'm here." Because for the first time in months, she wasn't. The morning after Claire's emergency, the hospital felt too quiet. Muted footsteps, distant intercoms, and the soft beeping of heart monitors created a rhythm that no longer frightened her, but reminded her just how alone she truly was. The IV in her arm dripped steadily. Her baby's heartbeat echoed from the monitor beside her bed, strong and steady, a miracle she couldn't take for granted anymore. Claire blinked awake to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt kind from the nurse's station. And then she saw him, Julian Hart, leaning against the wall, holding 2 cups and a small brown bag from a corner bakery no one in her life had ever cared enough to visit for her. "You remembered my bagel order," she whispered, hoarse. "You remembered my final schedule." "I owe you," he said, offering a rare half-smile. Claire looked at him, really looked. He didn't belong in this fluorescent room. Not with his tailored navy coat, not with the Mont Blanc pen clipped inside, not with that unmistakable presence of a man used to owning every room, boardrooms, briefings, negotiations. But here he was, in a plastic hospital chair with a coffee stain on the armrest, just waiting. Julian didn't ask many questions, didn't press. He just stayed, checked with the nurse, paid the bill, arranged for her release. She wanted to argue, but didn't have the strength. Maybe it was the painkillers. Maybe it was the heartbreak. Or maybe it was just too exhausting to keep pretending she didn't need anyone. So she let him drive her, but she expected a cab, not the sleek black Mercedes S-Class idling at the hospital curb. "Just until you're steady," he said simply, opening the door. The car glided through Brooklyn, over the bridge and into Manhattan like a whisper. Claire sat silent, cradling her belly with one hand, the other gripping the soft leather seat. They passed the usual landmarks, the skyline jagged and bright against the early winter sky. She tried to guess where they were going. Not until the elevator doors opened did she understand. The penthouse, Julian's penthouse, top floor of the plaza, floor-to-ceiling windows, a panoramic view of Central Park, quiet elegance. No gold-plated vulgarity, just clean lines, warm woods, and sunlight pouring through pristine glass. Claire stood motionless in the entryway, her hospital bag clutched like armor. "I can't stay here." "Then don't think of it as staying. Think of it as waiting until you know what comes next." The guest suite was larger than her entire old apartment. The bathroom alone looked like something out of a luxury hotel ad. Dior soap, thick white towels, and orchids in a marble vase. But Claire didn't cry. She didn't crumble. Instead, she stepped into the shower, let the water hit her skin, and watched the grime of betrayal swirl down the drain. Wrapped in a robe soft as clouds, she emerged to find a Kindle on the nightstand. A note clipped to it read, "Start with Chapter 3. I think you'll like the way she fights back." It was Women Who Run with the Wolves. She hadn't said a word to him about that book, but somehow Julian knew. This wasn't just luxury, it was refuge. And for the first time since Adam left, Claire felt like maybe she could breathe again. 3 weeks before the hospital call, Claire had still been wearing her wedding ring. She was 6 months pregnant and glowing in the way only expectant mothers do. Her hair fuller, her skin clear, her heart wide open. She had been planning a quiet dinner to tell Adam the baby's gender. She'd even bought tiny blue baby socks, folded in a Tiffany box, thinking it would make the moment feel special. She didn't have much money to spend, but it felt worth it. She waited for him at the dinner table. The candles burned low. Her pasta went cold. When he finally walked in, he didn't take off his coat. Instead, he dropped a manila envelope on the table. Claire stared at it. "What's this?" His answer was as hollow as the look in his eyes. "Divorce papers." She blinked, laughed. "That's not funny, Adam. I'm not joking." The silence after that was thick, unforgiving. "Why?" she whispered. Adam didn't look at her. "I can't do this. The baby, the life, the smallness of it all. I'm meant for more." She looked down at the tiny socks still resting in her lap. "What does Serena have to do with this?" He froze, his jaw clenched. So it was true. Claire had suspected something. The way Serena had stopped calling, how Adam had become glued to his phone, always just networking, how she found a Dior perfume bottle in their bathroom that wasn't hers. It all lined up. Claire stood slowly, her hands trembling. She was my best friend. You couldn't just ruin our marriage. You had to ruin the only friendship I had left. Adam shrugged. Serena believes in me. She knows I'm going places. She has connections in Paris, Milan. Real opportunities. Claire stepped back, her voice raw. You left your pregnant wife for my best friend to get ahead in the fashion world? Adam didn't deny it. You wouldn't understand. You're too comfortable with average. That night, Claire moved out. Not because she had somewhere to go, but because she couldn't sleep in a home where her heart had been gutted and left to rot. And Serena? She didn't even bother to call. A week later, Claire saw them on Instagram, Adam and Serena at an after-party in Manhattan. Champagne, flashing lights, and her best friend wearing Claire's old necklace. The caption read, "Power is beauty. Beauty is power." Claire stared at it until the screen blurred. Adam had used her stability to build his foundation, and when she was no longer useful, he left for someone shinier. Serena had smiled into her face for years, listened to her fears, held her hand through heartbreaks, just to step into her life like it was a coat to be worn and discarded. But what neither of them realized was this. Claire wasn't just broken, she was reforging. Every betrayal, every insult, every sleepless night was becoming something else. Fuel. Because the next time she faced them, it wouldn't be with tears. It would be with silence, strength, and something they didn't expect. A man standing beside her, who would never walk away. Claire hadn't planned on seeing them again, at least not so soon. But the world had its own twisted timing. She was waiting at the pharmacy inside Whole Foods, picking up her prenatal vitamins. Her coat was zipped tight over her growing belly, and she wore no makeup. She hadn't slept much, but she moved through the world quietly now, focused on surviving each day. She reached for her wallet when a familiar voice, loud, flirtatious, sharp, cut through the air like a knife. "Oh my God, babe, look at that display. Do you think Dior would approve?" "Serena?" Claire didn't even need to turn. That voice was etched into her bones. But when she did, the scene hit her like a slap. Adam, in a crisp designer coat, was pushing a cart filled with wine, caviar, and imported chocolate. Serena clung to his arm like a trophy, wearing heels that clicked too confidently for a grocery store. They hadn't seen her yet. But then they did. Serena froze mid-sentence, her smile faltering. Adam's eyes locked on Claire's belly. Claire didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She simply turned to the cashier and said, "Just this, thank you," her voice calm as if her heart hadn't just been torn open in public. But Serena couldn't resist. She sauntered over, her tones sweet and venom-laced. "Claire, wow, you're glowing. Pregnancy suits you." Claire glanced at her, eyes cool. "And betrayal suits you." Adam shifted uncomfortably, but Serena laughed like nothing could touch her. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. Things change, people change. You'll find someone eventually. I mean, someone who doesn't mind the baggage." Claire tilted her head. "You mean the baby?" Serena blinked. Claire smiled, faint, tired but real. "He's not baggage. He's the best part of me." For the first time, Serena had no comeback. Adam stepped forward. "Claire, listen," but she cut him off. "Don't." Her voice was low, controlled, deadly. "You gave up your place in my life. You don't get to comment on it now." The pharmacy clerk bagged her vitamins and handed them over. Claire took them, turned, and walked past them like they were no one. And the best part? People had been watching. A woman near the almond milk aisle whispered, "Is that her? The wife?" A man by the bread display snapped a photo, and before the day was over, a local gossip blog picked it up. Brooklyn billionaire's ex seen facing cheating ex and model girlfriend, Grace under fire. Julian sent no text, just a screenshot and 3 words, "I'm proud, always." Claire stared at the message, her fingers tracing the words. Not because she needed the validation, but because someone finally saw her, not as a victim, but as a woman standing back up. She didn't cry, she didn't vent, she just kept walking, vitamins in hand, baby in belly, spine straight. Public humiliation had arrived, but she didn't crumble. She absorbed it, turned it into armor, because the real power wasn't in revenge, it was in dignity. And Claire Whitmore was starting to remember who she was. Claire made it through the rest of the day in autopilot. She went home, took her vitamins, ate a small dinner, folded the laundry she'd left in the basket 3 days earlier. She answered one email from a parent about their child's reading level. Everything looked normal, on the outside. But by 8:17 p.m., the walls started closing in. The silence in the apartment, usually her only source of peace, suddenly felt deafening. Every second ticked by like a scream she couldn't drown out. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, cradling the curve of her belly, her other hand gripping her phone. She opened Julian's message again. "I'm proud. Always." She wanted to believe it. But the image of Serena's smile in Whole Foods haunted her. The way Adam looked at her, like Claire was a stranger. Like none of it. 5 years of marriage, weekend trips to Cape Cod, the nights they planned baby names, had ever mattered. Claire stood and went to the bathroom. She avoided the mirror. She didn't want to see the woman staring back. Pale. Hollow-eyed. Not the woman she used to be, who wore red lipstick and danced in the kitchen while making pancakes on Saturdays. Now even brushing her hair felt like too much. She sat on the cold tile floor, and that's where it happened. Not a dramatic scream, not a movie-style sob, just a slow, painful breaking. Tears leaked down her cheeks one by one, silent and hot. Her chest tightened, her hands shook, her thoughts blurred into a storm of everything she'd been holding in. I wasn't enough. He left so easily. She knew, and she did it anyway. The shame, the grief, the injustice. It hit her all at once. Too much to carry. Claire pressed her hand against her mouth to stop the sounds coming out. She didn't want the neighbors to hear, didn't want anyone to know. Because strong women don't fall apart, right? But she wasn't strong tonight. She was shattered. And the worst part? She felt completely invisible. She curled into herself, resting her head against the cool bathtub. Her baby kicked gently, as if reminding her he was still there. Still holding on. Still depending on her. That tiny movement both broke her further and saved her. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Over and over, like a prayer she didn't believe in. She didn't know how long she stayed there. Eventually the tears stopped, not because she felt better, but because her body ran out of strength. She crawled into bed without changing clothes, her eyes swollen, lips cracked, and heart too sore to think. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Julian. No words, just a photo. It was the Brooklyn skyline at night, taken from his balcony. The caption read, "You're not alone. Not tonight, not any night." She didn't respond, but she held the phone against her chest until she finally drifted into sleep. In the darkness, Claire learned something vital. Even the strongest women fall apart. But it's what they do after that defines them. Claire didn't respond to Julian's message that night, but she read it 10 times. The next morning, she woke up with puffy eyes and a mind still fogged from the breakdown, but something in her chest felt less heavy, not healed, not even close, but lighter, like she could sit up without falling apart. There was a knock at the door around 9 a.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, an older woman stood there with a gentle smile and a brown paper bag in her hands. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm Ruth. Julian asked me to drop this off. Said you haven't been eating real food lately, and he's tired of watching you survive on peanut butter toast." Claire blinked. "You're his housekeeper. But more like his guardian angel, if you ask me," Ruth said, stepping inside before Claire could object. "I used to work for his wife before the accident." Claire froze. She had never asked Julian about his wife, not directly. She only knew what the tabloids had printed 2 years ago. Car crash. Tragic loss. Billionaire disappears from public view for 6 months. Now, standing in her tiny kitchen, Ruth moved like someone who'd been part of Julian's world for years, and protected it fiercely. "He doesn't let many people in," Ruth said gently, unpacking homemade chicken soup and fresh sourdough. "But he's letting you in. I just thought you should know that." Claire didn't know what to say. Ruth handed her a folded note, written on thick cream paper in beautiful handwriting. "Claire, I know what it's like to wake up in a life you didn't choose. I lost her on a rainy Tuesday. 1 minute she was singing in the car, the next, gone. The silence after is worse than anything. You're not broken. You're grieving. And if you ever feel like speaking to someone who knows what that silence feels like, I'm here." Claire ran her fingers over the words. No pity. No advice. Just understanding. It broke her heart in a different way, because this time, it wasn't shattering. It was opening. Later that day, she met Julian at a small cafe tucked inside a bookstore in the West Village. Neutral ground, public, quiet. She hadn't meant to talk about anything personal. But the second he asked how she really was, the words just came. I thought being pregnant was supposed to be magical, but it's just lonely. Everyone talks about glowing. I just feel like I'm dissolving. Julian nodded. You're not. You're being reborn. It always feels like dying first. Claire looked at him then, not as the man who'd shown up at the hospital or the billionaire from a balcony, but as someone who knew, someone who had lost something too. He took out a worn leather notebook. I've written her a letter every month since she passed. I still do. Haven't missed one. Claire's breath caught. I've never told anyone that, he added. Silence passed between them, not awkward, but sacred. And in that stillness, something shifted. They weren't just two people surviving anymore. They were beginning to see each other, to recognize a kind of quiet, fragile hope they hadn't felt in years. Not love. Not yet, but something close. Something like possibility. Claire didn't wake up one day magically healed. There were no fireworks, no sudden sense of power surging through her veins. Just a quiet Tuesday morning, sunlight bleeding through the curtains, and the realization that, for the first time in weeks, she wanted to get dressed. Not needed. Wanted. She stood in front of her closet, ignoring the frumpy maternity leggings and oversized hoodies she'd worn on repeat. In the back hung a navy blue wrap dress, untouched since the first trimester. It still had the tag on it. She had bought it in a moment of hope, before Adam left. Claire tried it on. It fit differently now. Her body was changing, yes, but it still felt like her. Like a version of herself that hadn't completely disappeared. She looked in the mirror and whispered, "You're still in there." Later that day, she stopped by the school she had taken leave from. She wasn't there to beg for her job back, just to check in. Let them know she was okay. Principal Diaz, a firm but kind woman with silver-streaked hair, gave her a long look before saying, "We were going to ask if you'd consider teaching again. Remotely, reading sessions for the kids via Zoom. They miss you." Claire blinked. "Seriously? You bring calm," Diaz said, "and right now, calm is power." That night, she logged on to her first Zoom session with 12 second graders who screamed her name in excitement. One of them held up a handmade card that read, "You're our favorite chapter." Claire wiped her eyes and read Charlotte's Web aloud with a steady voice, even as her baby kicked like he knew she was doing something brave. Julian heard about the Zoom classes the next morning over coffee. He smiled. "So you're rebuilding," Claire shrugged. "It's just reading stories." "It's reclaiming your voice," he corrected. "That's never small." Later that week, he gave her a small black box, not jewelry, just a sleek, modern Mont Blanc pen. "For the next chapter," he said. Claire ran her fingers over the smooth barrel, the subtle weight, not flashy, not loud, just strong. Like who she was becoming again. With time, she started going for walks. She found a prenatal yoga class in a warm, sunlit studio. She went to therapy, bought a journal, listened to Women Who Run with the Wolves on her Kindle, and little by little she stopped thinking about Serena, stopped checking Adam's social media, stopped wondering if she had been enough. Because the truth was, she was enough. They just weren't worthy. The best part? Julian didn't push her to be anything she wasn't. He just made space, held doors, brought soup, sat with her in silence when words felt too sharp. And one night, as they watched the skyline from his balcony, he said, "You know, you never owed anyone your collapse." Claire looked at him. "You broke, but you never vanished." She smiled softly, eyes full but clear. This wasn't a dramatic makeover. It was slower, more sacred. A woman remembering herself, and every day she came back a little stronger, not to prove anything, not to win him, but for her. Because rebirth doesn't always come in fire. Sometimes it arrives in quiet, steady breath. The invitation arrived in a pale gray envelope with gold embossing. Serena's name was listed second on the hosting line, right after the brand that now backed her, Maison de Ravel, an exclusive Parisian fashion house expanding into the U.S. market. The gala would be held at the Glass Atrium in Soho. Private, elite, press invited. Power on display. Claire stared at the envelope for 5 minutes before setting it down. She hadn't spoken to Serena since the Whole Foods humiliation, hadn't seen Adam. But this was public. Deliberate. Julian entered the room quietly, watching her from the doorway. "You're not expected to go," he said. "I know. But maybe that's exactly why you should." Claire didn't answer. She just traced the edge of the envelope. Her fingers didn't shake. 3 nights later, she stood in front of the mirror in Julian's penthouse suite, wearing a floor-length black velvet gown. Clean lines, open back, timeless, no sparkle, no overstatement, just elegance. The makeup artist, a friend of Ruth's, had whispered, "You don't need contour. Your cheekbones are already carrying vengeance." Claire smiled for the first time that day. The gala buzzed with opulence. Champagne flutes, marble floors, photographers flashing like fireflies. Serena stood near the center, wrapped in a rose-gold gown, laughing too loudly at someone's joke. Adam was by her side, still wearing ambition like cologne. And then the air shifted. People turned. A ripple of silence followed the soft click of Claire's heels. She entered the room like she owned it, not by force but by presence. Pregnant, glowing, alone, not weak, whole. A journalist whispered, "That's Claire Whitmore." Serena saw her next. Her smile faltered, then returned, forced. "Claire," she called out, arms half raised. "What a surprise." Claire walked up slowly, gaze calm. "I heard Dior dropped your line," she said softly, just loud enough for the nearby camera to catch. Serena blinked. "And Adam," Claire added, turning her eyes on him. "How's your PR campaign going since those texts leaked?" He paled, because yes, someone had anonymously forwarded his crude, unfiltered messages about Claire and the baby to a journalist. Julian had nothing to do with it, but Ruth might have known someone. Claire turned to leave but paused. "Oh, and Serena," she smiled, warm but unshakable. "You were always second best. That's why you had to steal what wasn't yours." She walked away then. Didn't wait for the applause, didn't need the last word, because sometimes walking in is louder than shouting back. Julian met her by the exit. "You didn't just return," he whispered. "You arrived." And in that moment, Claire realized something else. This wasn't revenge, this was resurrection. The night after the gala, Claire didn't go back to her apartment. She couldn't. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because something inside her had shifted. The woman who stood in that marble hall met her past face to face and walked out without breaking. She wasn't the same woman who had wept silently in the dark. Julian opened the door before she even knocked. He'd been watching from the window. Claire stepped inside, the soft click of her heels echoing on the hardwood floor. She dropped her coat over the back of the couch and stood there, unsure what to do with the energy still running through her like a live wire. "You were," Julian began, astonishing. Claire turned to him. "I didn't do it for them. I know." Their eyes met, longer this time, deeper. She sat down on the velvet couch, her hands resting on her belly. "I keep thinking I should feel more triumphant, but I just feel quiet." Julian sat beside her. "Quiet is the sound of peace. You're not chasing chaos anymore." Claire looked down, suddenly vulnerable again. "I don't know how to do this, any of it. Not love, not trust, not rebuilding." Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "You don't have to know. You just have to allow." She turned toward him, slow, unsure. "I spent 2 years waking up to silence," he continued. "After she died, I thought I'd never speak about love again. Then you called, by accident, or maybe not." Claire's breath caught. "And when you whispered stay, I didn't know why. But I came. I didn't know who else to call," she admitted. "But you called me. There it was, the moment. No dramatic music, no sudden declarations, just 2 people scarred by loss sitting side by side, realizing that something soft had started to bloom beneath the grief." Julian reached out, slowly, fingers brushing hers. "May I?" Claire nodded. He took her hand and pressed it gently to his chest, right over his heartbeat. It was strong, steady, real. "I don't want to fix you," he said. "I want to witness you." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the shock of being seen. Fully. Without agenda. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he replied. And then, without hesitation, Julian leaned in, not to kiss her lips, but to rest his forehead gently against hers. It was the softest connection Claire had felt in years. Her walls didn't crash down, they melted. Her baby kicked once, almost like an answer. Julian smiled against her skin. "He knows." Claire laughed, a real one this time. And in that moment, in that quiet room above Manhattan, love didn't rush in like a storm. It arrived like morning light. Patient, certain, unavoidable. Claire no longer looked in the mirror and wondered who was staring back. Now when she studied her reflection, dressed in clean lines, hair pulled back, no longer hiding her pregnancy, she saw strength. Not in how she looked, but in what she survived. And more importantly, in who she was becoming. The first true shift came not with a man, but with a choice. Julian had offered her sanctuary, support, even quiet companionship, but he never tried to define her. And so Claire started building her way. She launched a small online book club for mothers, streaming free read-aloud sessions once a week. What started with 10 subscribers grew to over 2,000 in a month. Moms from around the country messaged her, women who felt forgotten, overwhelmed, or erased by the demands of motherhood. Her inbox overflowed with words like, "I thought I was the only one. You made me feel seen. My daughter said she loves your voice more than cartoons." Julian helped set up the back end, tech stuff she'd never touched before. But the words, the heart, that was all Claire. She called it Chapter 1. Because that's what it was. Her story, rewritten on her terms. One day, while walking through Bryant Park with Ruth, baby Bump wrapped in a soft cream coat, Claire paused at a vendor selling handmade journals. She picked one up. The cover read, "Start where you are." She smiled. "I'm thinking of writing something," she said. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Memoir?" Claire laughed. "Not yet, a children's book about a little fox who lost her way but found her voice." Ruth beamed. "I think the world needs that." With each passing week, Claire reclaimed a piece of herself, not from Adam, not from Serena, but from the version of her that once believed being soft meant being weak. Now, softness was her superpower. Compassion. Listening. Creating. She wasn't trying to prove her worth anymore. She was simply living it. When Serena posted another photo from Paris, posing in front of a rented sports car with a hollow caption about manifesting abundance, Claire didn't feel rage. She felt pity. Adam's name came up in an article detailing the scandal around his failed launch campaign. Investor trust had plummeted after the leaked messages. Rumors swirled that he was spiraling, blaming Serena for costing him everything. But Claire? Claire was rising. She had a growing online platform, a draft of her first book, and her baby's nursery filled with light and handmade blankets from women across the country. At night, she curled beside Julian on the couch. They read, or said nothing, or simply shared space. There was no need to fill silence with noise. They knew. "You're different now," Julian said once. "Different how? You walk like you own your future." Claire rested her head against him, smile soft. "Because for the first time, I do." She didn't just rebuild her life, she redefined it. Not in reaction to pain, but in response to possibility. And that was the difference. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was leading. It happened on a Wednesday. Not a holiday, not a birthday. Just an ordinary Wednesday. Until it wasn't. Julian had told Claire to meet him at the River Cafe, Brooklyn's hidden gem beneath the bridge, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She hadn't been there in years, not since her first anniversary with Adam. Back then, she'd worn pearls and hope. This time, she wore a soft navy dress and the quiet confidence of a woman who'd rebuilt her life brick by brick. The maitre d' smiled the moment she arrived. "Miss Whitmore, right this way." She followed him through the glass doors to the garden terrace, where fairy lights blinked against the dusk. Julian was waiting, not in a suit, but in a charcoal sweater and slacks. His hair was wine-swept. He looked like home. Claire sat down, unsure. "You're not really the surprise dinner type," he smiled. "I didn't plan a dinner." Before she could respond, a string quartet emerged quietly from the shadows. Not loud, not staged, just background music. Until she recognized the song. It was the same lullaby she'd hummed during a live stream weeks ago. Something her mother used to sing. She'd mentioned it offhand, not thinking anyone had noticed. But Julian had. "Claire," he said, "I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone who saw the world the way you do. Not with control, but with care. Not with ambition, but with purpose." Her breath caught. "You've made me want things I thought I'd buried. Not just love, but legacy. Not just family, but faith." Then he stood, reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter. Not a ring, a letter. Her heart paused. He handed it to her, eyes steady. "Before I ask you anything, I want you to read this." Claire unfolded it with shaking fingers. It was written in the same pen he always carried. Inside, a single page. The top line read, "To my son." She read it slowly. Julian had written a letter months ago before the hospital call. In it, he confessed his fears, his grief, and his hope. He spoke about losing his wife, about being afraid to love again, but mostly about the day he hoped would come, when he could choose a family again, not out of obligation, but out of love. Tears streamed down Claire's face. Julian stepped closer, voice barely a whisper. "This isn't just about us, it's about choosing this baby, this life, this next chapter." Then finally he pulled out the box. Inside, no diamond, no spectacle, just a thin platinum band engraved with the word "stay." The word she had once whispered at her weakest. The word he had honored without question. "Claire Whitmore," he said, "will you build this life with me, not because you need me, but because you want to?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." He slid the ring on her finger. The quartet shifted to a warm reprise. The lights glowed golden behind her. And in that moment, under the Brooklyn Bridge where her heart had once shattered, she chose love again, not blind, not desperate, but wide-eyed, rooted, ready. 2 days after the proposal, Claire was glowing, not because of the ring or the surprise or the way Julian held her hand like it was something sacred. No, she was glowing because, for the first time, everything felt settled. But peace, as she would learn, doesn't last long when bitter people have access to the internet. The first email came in the middle of the night. The subject line read, "Just so you know." Attached were blurry screenshots, private forum comments, rumors, and 2 photos taken with a long lens. One of Claire entering Julian's building, the other of them at the proposal dinner. And the comments were cruel. "Isn't she the teacher who trapped a billionaire? From baby bump to business class. Gold digger level, expert. Funny how fast some women heal when there's money involved." Claire sat in bed, phone shaking in her hand. She hadn't done anything wrong. But that didn't stop the hate. An hour later, her name was trending. A gossip blog had posted a deep dive titled, "From Abandoned Wife to Billionaire Bride, Claire Whitmore's Calculated Climb." It featured old photos of her with Adam, screenshots from her live streams, even a comment from a source close to the ex-husband. It read, "Claire always played the victim. She knew what she was doing. She used the baby, used me, and now she's playing the sympathy card. People should know who she really is." Claire's stomach dropped. Adam. Serena had fed the story. The timing was too precise, too vicious. Just as Claire was rising, they struck. Julian called 10 minutes later. "Don't read anything else," he said. "We're handling it." But Claire wasn't afraid. She was angry. She had stayed silent when Adam left. She had kept her dignity when Serena stole her life. But not this time. She walked into Julian's home office, sat at his desk, opened her laptop and recorded a video. No makeup, no script, just her. "I'm Claire Whitmore," she began. "Yes, I was married. Yes, I was left while pregnant. Yes, I've moved on, with a man who never asked me to shrink." She didn't cry, she didn't attack, she simply told the truth. "I didn't plan any of this. I didn't trap anyone. I survived and I grew, and I'm not ashamed of that." She ended the video with a quiet sentence that cut deeper than any scandal. Women don't need permission to rebuild. Within 24 hours, the video went viral. Mothers, teachers, survivors from around the world began posting their own stories with the hashtag #RebuildLikeClaire. The narrative flipped. Claire wasn't the villain, she was the voice. And while Adam and Serena had tried to burn her down, she turned their fire into fuel. A storm rolled in just after midnight. Claire had been tossing in bed, half asleep, her hand resting over the soft swell of her belly. Julian was out of town on a last-minute investor summit in Boston, his first time leaving her side in weeks. He had kissed her forehead before leaving, promising to be back the next night. But the baby had other plans. The first contraction wasn't dramatic. It was sharp, low, and confusing. She thought it was nerves. Then came the second, stronger, unmistakable. Claire sat up, heart pounding. She was 2 weeks early. She reached for her phone and called her OB. The nurse's voice was calm, practiced. "If the pain's regular, come in. Better safe than sorry." The contractions were 10 minutes apart when Claire stepped out into the rain. No umbrella, no driver, just her and a rush of determination. She called a rideshare, but the app kept spinning. Lightning cracked above the Manhattan skyline. Thunder rattled the glass of her apartment windows. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter and breathed through the next wave. Then a knock. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, Ruth stood there, soaked, clutching her purse and an overnight bag. "Julian sent me," she said breathlessly. "His flight's grounded. He knew the baby might come early. Said you'd pretend you were fine and try to go alone." Claire laughed, tearful. "He knows me too well." 20 minutes later, they were in Ruth's Toyota, crawling through storm traffic toward New York Presbyterian. Claire gripped the dashboard. "It hurts." "I know, sweetheart, but you're doing great." Rain battered the windshield. The city glowed in blurry streaks. But inside that car, something sacred unfolded. Ruth reached over and held her hand. "You're not alone this time. Got it?" Claire nodded, too overcome to speak. By the time they arrived, her water had broken. Nurses rushed her into triage. Monitors beeped. The world narrowed to breath and pressure and the rhythm of labor. 2 hours in, she was exhausted. Sweat dripped down her temples. Her body screamed, and then her phone buzzed. A video call. Julian, his face filled the screen. "Claire, I'm here. I'm with you. Every breath, every push." She cried, not from pain, but from love, from not having to do it alone. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you've got this. You've survived worse. You're about to meet the person who saved you before they were even born." 4 more pushes, a scream that echoed, and then a cry. Raw, real, new. The nurse placed the baby on her chest. A boy. Tiny fingers, damp hair, eyes still adjusting to the light. Claire sobbed, "He's perfect." Julian was still on the call. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Claire turned the camera toward the baby. "Meet your son," she whispered. "He waited for you." Julian nodded. "He waited for us." That stormy night, in a hospital room filled with quiet and tears and newborn breath, a new story began. Not a comeback, a beginning. The hospital room was quiet the next morning. Not silent, but soft. Filled with the kind of stillness that only follows the arrival of something sacred. Claire held her newborn against her chest. His breathing was slow, his face still wrinkled from the stormy entrance. Tiny. Real. Whole. Julian arrived just after sunrise. He hadn't slept. Still in the same clothes from the airport, shoes wet from the last stretch of his mad dash to the hospital. But the moment he stepped through the doorway, something inside Claire settled. He crossed the room slowly. Claire looked up. "You made it." "I wasn't going to miss this," he whispered, reaching for her hand. Then carefully he looked down at the baby. The boy's eyes were closed, his tiny fingers curled against Claire's robe. Julian knelt beside the bed, one hand on Claire's arm, the other on the blanket wrapped around the child. "I don't even have words," he said. "I know." Claire breathed. "Me too." They hadn't picked a name. Claire hadn't wanted to talk about it before, not when everything had felt so uncertain, but now that he was here, it felt like the most important decision she'd ever make. Julian sat beside her, watching the baby sleep. Claire took a deep breath. "I've been thinking." Julian turned. "I want to name him Elijah." He blinked. "Why Elijah?" Claire looked at her son. "Because Elijah means, my God is strength, and strength is what brought him here. Through abandonment, through heartbreak, through storms." Julian nodded slowly, then added, voice barely above a whisper, "Elijah was the name we were going to give our son." Claire turned sharply. Julian looked down at his hands. "The baby we lost. I never told anyone, not even Ruth, but when I heard you say it just now, I knew it wasn't coincidence." Claire's eyes welled with tears. "Julian," he shook his head. "No sadness. It's not loss anymore. It's legacy. He's not a replacement. He's a continuation." Claire pressed her lips to Elijah's head. "Then it's decided." Julian stood and leaned in, resting his forehead against hers, just like he had the night of the proposal. "Elijah Whitmore," he whispered, "a name born from 2 heartbreaks and 1 hope." A nurse entered gently. "Any updates on the name for the birth certificate?" Claire looked at Julian. He didn't flinch. "Claire gets the final say," he told the nurse, then glanced at her with the softest eyes. Claire smiled. "Elijah Julian Whitmore." The nurse nodded. "Beautiful." Julian exhaled, as if a weight had lifted he didn't know he was carrying. That afternoon, while Elijah slept in his bassinet, Claire opened a blank page in her journal. She wrote, "Dear Elijah, you are not born of perfection, but of persistence. You are proof that broken hearts can build whole worlds. You are everything I never dared to hope for, and everything I promise never to take for granted." She closed the journal. Julian brought her a coffee, decaf of course, and they watched the skyline from the hospital window. Their baby between them, their story ahead of them. And on that soft morning, with the city waking outside, they knew. This was more than healing. It was heritage. It had been 3 weeks since Elijah's birth. Claire had fallen into a quiet rhythm. Midnight feedings, warm baths, soft lullabies. Her body was still healing, but her spirit felt steadier than it had in years. She and Julian took walks through Central Park bundled in scarves, Elijah tucked safely into a stroller. People often stopped them, not because they recognized Claire from the scandal, but because they looked like a family now. Not perfect, just And then the letter came. Not an email, not a text, a real letter. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It was from Adam. I saw the video, the one where you told the truth. I thought I'd be angry, but mostly I'm ashamed. You didn't deserve what I did to you, and even if it's too late, I needed you to know. I ruined everything because I wanted more. You created more out of what I ruined. I hope your son never inherits my kind of emptiness. There was no signature, just silence at the bottom of the page. Claire read it twice. 3 times. She didn't cry, didn't rage. She just exhaled. Later that afternoon, she told Julian. He didn't react with anger, just concern. What do you want to do? Nothing, she said, but her heart disagreed. 3 days later, Claire stood outside a small cafe in Tribeca. She'd asked for one final conversation. No threats, no yelling, just closure. Adam arrived looking thinner, eyes shadowed, beard slightly overgrown. He wore the same coat from last winter, but he looked older now, smaller. Hi, Claire said simply. Hi, Adam echoed, unsure. They sat, no hug, no handshake, just air between them. I got your letter, she said. He nodded. I don't need an apology to move on, but I do need to know. Why her? Why then? Adam stared at his coffee. She made me feel invincible. You made me feel exposed. I confused comfort for weakness. Claire smiled sadly. I wasn't weak, I was just real. I know that now. Claire leaned forward. And Serena? He gave a hollow laugh. She left. Said I was dead weight. Guess betrayal's not such a thrill when it's turned back on you. Claire didn't gloat, didn't even flinch. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Adam looked at her. Losing you every day? There was a long pause. Then Claire stood. I hope you find peace, Adam, but you won't find it in me. He nodded, no defense left in him. She walked out of the cafe, not looking back. Outside, Julian was waiting with Elijah in his arms. Claire reached for her son, pressed a kiss to his forehead. You okay? Julian asked gently. She smiled. I just buried something that's been trying to die for years. They walked away slowly, stroller wheels humming over the pavement. No anger, no bitterness, only space. And finally, closure. There was no RSVP list, no luxury ballroom, no bridal magazine spread, just a sun-drenched backyard in upstate New York, under an old oak tree with golden leaves gently falling like confetti from nature itself. Claire and Julian didn't want spectacle. They wanted sacred. A ceremony not for approval, but for alignment. Something that felt more like a whispered promise than a public performance. They invited 10 people. Ruth, of course, who had become something between a godmother and guardian angel. Principal Diaz, Claire's mentor, who first reminded her she mattered. 2 of Julian's childhood friends from Boston, and the rest? Women from Claire's online book club who had flown in on their own dime. Strangers turned sisters, bonded by healing. Claire wore a soft ivory silk dress that hugged her gently but allowed room for her healing postpartum body. No corset, no veil, just comfort and the quiet glow of a woman who had survived the collapse of her world and rebuilt it stronger. Julian wore a dark blue suit, nothing flashy, his Mont Blanc pen tucked into his pocket. A habit now, he always carried it, in case inspiration struck. As the small group gathered, Ruth gently held Elijah in a soft gray wrap, bouncing him in rhythm with the soft string music playing in the background. Julian stepped forward first. No paper, no rehearsal, just eyes locked with hers. I didn't fall in love with the version of you the world tried to erase. I fell in love with the fire you lit beneath the ashes. Claire's eyes welled. Julian continued, voice unwavering. You don't complete me. You challenge me. You ground me. You remind me that love doesn't erase pain. It honors it. Then he smiled. And I vow, every day, to never let you forget your worth again. Claire's turn. She pulled out a slip of paper from her bouquet, pressed between wildflowers, handwritten. Julian, I didn't think I'd ever trust again, but you didn't ask me to. You waited. You walked beside me, not in front. She blinked back tears. You held my hand in silence when the words felt too dangerous. And now, I say this with all the clarity pain has given me. I choose you. Not because I need saving, but because you make peace louder than fear. Their rings were simple platinum bands. No diamonds, no flash, just the word begin engraved inside both. Because that's what it was. Not a finish line, but a start. As the officiant pronounced them partners in love and life, Elijah let out a perfectly timed coo. Everyone laughed gently. Claire kissed Julian's cheek, then forehead, then lips. Slow, sure. There was no applause, just warm light, wind in trees, and the sound of belonging. Afterward, they sat at one long wooden table under the branches, passing warm bread and roasted vegetables. No caterer. Just food made by Ruth and the women who had flown in. It didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like a gathering of souls who knew how precious it was to start again. That night, Julian slipped a note into Claire's journal. You were never too much. The world was just too small for your kind of fire. She smiled, holding Elijah close, as the stars blinked awake. No spotlight, no stage, just family, chosen, cherished, free. They didn't rush. That's the first thing Claire learned about life after the storm. There was no need to sprint. Julian still kept his schedule in a sleek leather planner. Boardrooms and investment calls still filled his calendar. But now, there were boundaries. Meetings paused for bath time. Emails waited while Elijah giggled in the background. Claire continued her live stream readings once a week. Her Chapter 1 community had grown into a movement. Book deals were on the table, invitations to speak. Women wrote in, telling her how hearing her story helped them walk away, start over, breathe again. But she didn't say yes to everything. Because now she knew, doing everything wasn't healing. Choosing carefully was. They bought a townhouse in Brooklyn, a brownstone with ivy that curled around the windows like it belonged in a novel. Not massive, not flashy, but full of warmth. One Sunday morning, Claire stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring pancake batter, while Elijah babbled in his high chair and Julian hummed to a jazz record playing in the corner. She paused, not for a dramatic moment, just to absorb it. This life, this normal, quiet, sacred life, she had once begged the universe just to survive. Now she was thriving. Not in headlines, not in luxury, but in breath, in laughter, in legacy. Later that afternoon, Julian took her by surprise with a small box. No, not jewelry. Inside was a first-edition copy of Charlotte's Web, the same book Claire had read in her very first live stream. She gasped, "Julian, how did you—" He smiled. "You changed lives reading this. I figured it belonged on your shelf, in the home you built." She flipped through the fragile pages and stopped on one. A sticky note had been tucked inside. It read, "Your words saved more than one life." She blinked back tears. "Claire," Julian said, stepping behind her, arms around her waist, "you didn't just rebuild, you created something better." She turned to face him. "Julian," she whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." "Of what?" "Of being loved the right way." And he kissed her forehead, slow and still. That night, Claire added one more entry to her journal. "To my son, you were born into a world that broke your mother before it built her. But know this, you were not the reason for her pain. You were the reason she came back stronger. We are not survivors. We are architects." Upstairs, Elijah slept between two hand-stitched pillows from her book club community, gifts from women she might never meet but would never forget. Downstairs, Claire curled into Julian's arms, watching the soft flicker of candles across the bookshelves. No noise, no rush, just space. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was trying to prove anything. She didn't need to. She was already more than enough. Claire hadn't stepped into a classroom in nearly 2 years, not since her world unraveled, not since her job title was replaced by scandal, her days measured in survival, not syllabi. But when the invitation came from Principal Diaz himself, she didn't hesitate. It was a modest ask. Speak to the graduating class of her former middle school, most of whom had followed her live streams with their parents. Claire said yes, not for the applause, for the roots. The auditorium still smelled like dry erase markers and cafeteria pizza. The chairs squeaked. The stage curtain stuck halfway open. But to Claire, it felt sacred. She wore a soft green dress, hair in a simple twist, a notebook tucked under her arm. Julian sat in the front row with Elijah asleep in a baby wrap, Ruth beside him holding tissues, just in case. Principal Diaz introduced her. "She was once your teacher, then your storyteller, now your example. Claire stepped up to the podium. Her hands didn't shake. She looked out at rows of fresh faces, eyes wide, futures unwritten. 2 years ago, she began, I stood in this room thinking my life was complete. I had a plan, a marriage, a job. I believed stability was the same as safety. She paused. Then everything changed. I was left pregnant, jobless, humiliated. A ripple of shock moved through the students, but Claire's voice remained steady. I wanted to hide. I thought starting over meant I'd failed, but starting over isn't failure, it's faith. She took a breath. Because life will knock you down, people will leave, plans will crumble. But if you remember who you are, if you fight to reclaim your voice, you will rise. She glanced at Julian. At first, I read stories aloud online to survive, but I kept reading to connect. To remind people that healing isn't loud, it's consistent. It's small steps. It's choosing to keep going, even when no one claps. The auditorium was silent. Still, some of you will become doctors, artists, parents. Some of you will lose yourselves, and some of you will find yourself in the middle of loss. She smiled. And that's okay, because you're not here to be perfect. You're here to live, fully, even through the mess. Applause erupted, but Claire didn't tear up yet. That came later, when a girl approached her after the speech. 6th grade. Freckles. Eyes that looked too tired for her age. My mom watches you every night, the girl whispered. She left someone bad, because of you. Claire bent down, took her hand, and said, Then your mom is the hero of both our stories. As they left the school that day, Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You were born to teach, he said. Claire shook her head gently. No, I was born to remind people they matter. She looked back at the school, then down at Elijah, then up at the sky. The place that had once marked the collapse of her identity now marked the reclamation of her power. It was a Sunday morning, years later. The world was quieter now. Elijah was 5, bright, curious, always asking questions that made Claire pause before answering. He had Julian's thoughtful eyes, but Claire's spirit. He loved picture books, warm toast with strawberry jam, and building blanket forts in the living room. That morning, he ran into their bedroom with a crayon drawing in his hand. Mom, Dad, look, it's our family. Julian sat up in bed, sleep in his eyes. Claire, already journaling by the window, turned with a smile. The drawing was simple, 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a rainbow sky. One was clearly Elijah, another was Julian. The third had long hair, Claire, and next to her, a tiny figure with a round belly. Claire blinked. Who's this? Elijah grinned. That's the baby, from your tummy. Claire looked up, stunned. Elijah? Julian's face lit with realization. They hadn't told him yet, but somehow, he knew. Claire laughed, then cried. The kind of tears that come not from sorrow, but from the full bloom of everything she'd thought she lost, now returned in double. Later that day, as Julian wrapped an arm around her waist, she said, Can you believe all this started with a wrong number? He kissed her temple. Maybe not so wrong after all. She had thought her legacy would be a classroom, a lesson plan, a teacher's plaque in a hallway. But it was this. A son who would grow up knowing that softness was strength. A daughter on the way, who would be born into a world where her mother's voice had already changed lives. A man who loved her not for how perfectly she healed, but for how bravely she kept walking through pain. And a world of strangers who now read bedtime stories with hope because of one woman who refused to stay silent. Her live streams had evolved into something larger, an online platform offering healing through stories. They'd opened a physical reading room in Brooklyn called Chapter 1, not a bookstore, a sanctuary. Anyone could walk in, sit down, and be reminded they weren't alone. Claire had returned to writing, not just children's books, but memoir essays, poetry, and even a best-selling guide for women rebuilding after betrayal. The title? Stay. The story I almost didn't finish. One evening, as the sun set over their brownstone, Julian brought out a box from the attic. Inside, the original hospital bracelet from Elijah's birth, their wedding bands engraved with Begin, and a faded copy of Claire's first journal entry. She read it out loud. To the woman I used to be, you didn't fail. You were just planting roots in the dark. Look at us now. Julian whispered, You did it, Claire. She shook her head softly. No, we did it. And that night, as stars dotted the sky and laughter echoed from Elijah's room, Claire looked around her home. The life she chose, the love she built, and felt something rare. Not relief, not victory. But peace? She didn't win, she didn't escape, she grew. And that, she now knew, was the real happy ending. So that's how the story ends, or maybe how it truly begins. Hey, if you're still here, still watching with us until this very moment, that means something in this story has touched your heart. Even just a little. Maybe you saw yourself in Claire. Maybe you remembered a pain you've carried quietly. Or maybe, just maybe, you needed this reminder today. You are allowed to start again. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's what Claire did. What tried to break her became the very path that built her. This isn't just a story about betrayal or healing. It's about choosing who you want to be, despite what you've lost. And if you felt that, if you felt seen, then stay with us. Share this with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe, because this channel isn't just about drama. It's about truth, resilience, and stories that speak to your soul. We're not just telling stories. We're building a space where you can breathe, feel, and maybe, just maybe, believe again. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think.